Welcome again, everyone, to today's webcast, How the Strategic-Minded PMO Can Drive Business Transformation. My name is Ben Chamberlain. I'm the Chief Product and Marketing Officer here at UMT360. So today, I really want to pose two questions. I have two questions top of mind. First, can your PMO take a leading role in digital business transformation? And I also want you to ask yourself a question throughout. Now, what am I managing? Am I managing projects or am I managing business investments? In today's session, we're really going to take a very, very high-level look at some of the four key trends we see emerging and many strategic PMOs embracing over the coming years. And again, I warn you, we are going to stay at a quite high level because each one of these trends in themselves represents a full webcast. So this is a moderated session, so please use the GoToWebinar Q&A manager. We will be pausing at the end of today's session around the hour to field any questions that you may have. So let's jump into the content and take a look at how you can take responsibility for digital business transformation. I'm not sure how many of you have heard the term digital business transformation. It's something that Gartner's been talking a lot about recently. And a couple of quotes here from Gartner in terms of what is a digital business or what is digitalization at large. They say digital business is the creation of a new business designs by blurring the digital and physical worlds. They say that digitalization is the use of digital technologies to change a business model and provide new revenue and value-producing opportunities. Gartner say that really the nexus of forces are the platform for the digital business. The nexus of forces are disruptive technologies around social, mobile, cloud, and information or big data. What Gartner's saying is there's an opportunity to leverage these disruptive technologies to improve how your business operates or transform key capabilities to improve the products and services that the organization provides their customers. I was at a Gartner show the other day and they gave an example of what a digital business looks like. They said take a insurance company, for example, a company that provides home insurance, and think of how they would digitalize the claim process. So what would happen today, God forbid, if your house caught on fire? Chances are you'd put a phone call into the insurance company, a claim adjuster would be released, would come to your house, start taking photos, and the claim process would start to progress and process. Think about how that capability to fulfill a claim in an insurance company could be digitalized. So picture a world where a fire breaks out in the house, that obviously the fire services and insurance company are notified automatically based on the fire alarm. At that point, the insurance company leverages new technologies like drones to send a drone out automatically over your house to almost instantaneously start taking pictures of maybe the fire damage to the roof. The claim has already started. That drone starts pushing those photographs back into the insurance company's cloud, and that claim starts to be processed. So you can see how we can take what is a fairly standard capability in an organization, in this case of filling a claim, and start to utilize different technologies both in the digital and physical world to improve it. I think one of the best examples of a digital business today that I can think of in terms of transforming a market is maybe Uber. Uber that really has transformed the taxi carriage industry by leveraging the nexus of forces. So leveraging mobile, cloud, and crowdsourcing the physical assets of drivers and cars to transform how we think about the taxi carriage industry, which is a good example. So at a high level, there's an opportunity to digitalize your business. I think the risks are very apparent. As executives, I don't think we can really rely on the status quo anymore. We have to continue to evolve and improve the products and services that we offer to excite our customer base. These three companies, I think the stories are fairly well understood. There was certain common characteristics here. Each one of these companies, Blockbuster, Kodak, BlackBerry, held the dominant position in their relative verticals or industries, and things changed pretty quickly. We all know the story around Blockbuster, how Netflix, first of all, went after the traditional business by providing a different delivery technique for DVDs through the postal service, and then put almost the final nail in the coffin through leveraging streaming technologies and other things. Kodak obviously was a dominant player in film photography, actually had some of the early patents around digital film technology too, but failed to act on it, and obviously that cost them dearly. And also we know about BlackBerry having a strong position in the cell phone market, and maybe not keeping up with the times and losing that dominant position. I think another common trait here between these companies is they either all failed to define the right strategy, or they failed to effectively execute on that business strategy. One of the things I like about my role is I get the opportunity to meet many executives from different companies. And there's an overarching concern that executives don't believe their companies have the ability to effectively execute on their strategy, and also acknowledge the fact that failure to deliver strategic initiatives will impact the competitiveness of their organization over the upcoming years. So a couple of stats here on the left-hand side that sort of drive this point home. David Norton, from one of the founders of the Balanced Scorecard, says that 85% of companies fail to deliver on their strategies. From the Economist Intelligence Unit, two stats here. 61% of companies struggle to bridge the gap between strategy formulation and the resulting execution. And 44% of strategic initiatives have been unsuccessful on average. So we think about that. There's a difficulty in defining strategy. There's a difficulty in identifying the right initiatives and executing them effectively, which is a concern to me because I've been in the project and portfolio management space for longer than I care to remember. And I remember in the mid-2000s when we were marketing PPM solutions, and even today, it was under the sort of guise of the ability to more effectively select the right initiatives and deliver the right initiatives effectively. So wasn't PPM meant to deliver on this promise? I think the truth is today that more traditional, and when I say traditional, execution-orientated project and portfolio management techniques have simply failed to deliver the anticipated results. Again, more stats here on the right-hand side. I think these are fairly well understood. From the Standish Group, 18% of projects fail to get implemented, or 43% of projects come in challenged, meaning they're late or over budget. Gartner say that 1 out of 3 completed projects experiences significant cost overruns. And the good old PMI mentioned that 33% of projects fail to really deliver on their objectives or business outcomes. As I mentioned, we've been in the project and portfolio management space longer than I care to remember, and our own research shows that when organizations are solely relying on more execution-oriented project and resource management capabilities, there's a danger of losing around 46% of the planned business value, or ROI, from these investments. Or another way to look at this is around 50% of the investment in our project and program portfolios is at risk. And we'll touch on some of the reasons for why this 46% occurs throughout the trends portion of the session today. But at a high level, it's to do with unreliable planning, poor financial insights and transparency, and the inability to really look across portfolios and fully understand the fully integrated nature and the operating fabric of our business. So, when I think about why this 46% occurs, often as a PMO, we've embraced more of the tactical activities of executing projects. So, really taking responsibility for these important but yet tactical and execution-oriented activities like schedule management, finite resource management, issues risk management, and other governance activities. But I think we simply have to stop and recognize the fact that the projects are not necessarily projects. At their core, they are business investments. They're things that we're investing in to drive revenue, to reduce costs, to better align with compliance standards. And we have to treat them as such. And as a PMO, need to really view these as business investments and therefore take strategic responsibility for optimizing spend and maximizing value across the portfolio at any given time. So I think the PMO today faces a challenging role and almost a daunting task, and have to be comfortable in fulfilling two complementary roles. The first is continue to be the masters of project and program delivery, sort of wear the PMI hat and be those masters of execution. And the second, again, is to take responsibility for optimizing spend and maximizing value and almost become the CFO of the project and program portfolio, highlighting importance around budgeting, value management, cost management, and other things. Now, we're going to take a look at some of the trends that we may want to consider in 2016 and beyond. The first we'll look at is around aligning execution with strategy. Next, we'll look at dynamic reallocation or dynamic planning, performance measurements, and asset portfolio management. So let's jump in with the first trend, align execution with strategy. As we go through this section, I want you to ask yourself, how good is my top-down strategic planning process? Now, am I able to identify the right demand or the right initiatives? Do I have a framework in place that allows me to understand and align both discretionary or strategic spend and activities with strategy, as well as operational spend and activities with strategy? Also, do we have the ability to manage hybrid execution methodologies, so projects managed in Agile and Waterfall, and control them within our planning framework? Gartner says that by 2017, 75% of IT organizations out there will be operating in a bimodal capacity, meaning they'll have initiatives on stabilizing the business, which will often lend well to a waterfall management, and they need more agility and be transacting initiatives through more iterative or agile techniques. So we're going to take a look at how we can improve our top-down planning in the organization and ultimately better align execution with strategy. And I think this quote here is quite apt. If you don't know where you're going, you're most likely going to end up someplace else. We spend a lot of time working with organizations to look at improving how they ultimately align execution with strategy and introduce more top-down planning techniques to deliver on that promise. And these three here, project-driven, program-driven, and capability-driven, are the three most common that we see. And for sure, there is a maturity step up as you move left to right within this graphic. I'm going to touch on each of these. All are good, but all have their strengths and weaknesses. So the project-driven is probably the most common and often used in support of an annual planning process. And if you think about this at 100,000 foot, what tends to happen is the execs in the organization gather together to define and prioritize strategy for the upcoming planning period or periods. And then in that traditional annual planning exercise, projects are gathered from across the business, almost thrown into that kind of digital or virtual hopper, and then using semi-sophisticated techniques mapped back against strategy, and under different budget constraints, we kick out an optimal project portfolio, one that in theory best align with the strategy. Now, this is a methodology we actually introduced in the early 2000s, and it has become fairly mainstay. But I think back then we really saw this as a top-down approach to selecting projects. But the truth is it's bottom-up. And the major issue here with this approach is that ultimately strategy is defined and prioritized in a silo, and then projects in themselves are gathered from across the business, disconnected from the strategy, and then we use strategy as a kind of sorting technique to really prioritize and optimize these requests. But I don't think we ever stop to ask ourselves, what are we doing here? Are we just selecting the best of a questionable bunch of projects? How sure were we from the get-go that we had the highest quality demand in the hopper in the first place? So the fundamental flaw with this process is that you're not sure you started out with the right projects based on how projects were gathered. But again, compared to ultimate chaos in terms of having no process to consolidate and evaluate initiatives, it still remains extremely valid and a good starting pace for many organizations. Now, the next two approaches, program-driven and capability-driven, look to really overcome that key frailty in the project-driven approach, which is better correlation or generation of demand from the strategy that's been defined and prioritized in the organization. So the program-driven approach provides a kind of sequential way of doing exactly that. So this slide shows kind of the program-driven approach in action, the ability to really decompose strategy to whatever level of detail it's needed, going from the objectives to the business drivers, so that they can be actionable, measurable, unique, and clearly communicated to different functions across the organization and then be actioned. So the ability to break down strategy is key. Then you introduce investment programs that are generated to deliver on each one of those strategic imperatives. And funding can be applied at the program level. So funds are allocated at the program level. And then from there, we break down into the projects that are going to be executed across these multi-year programs. So from this graphic, there is a strong and tight correlation between the strategy that was defined in the first place all the way down to the projects that are being executed. And the programs act almost as that kind of investment hub that allow us to reallocate funds at any point in the process. Going back to the ability to execute in different execution methodologies, agile versus the traditional waterfall approach, or the bimodal discussion that I mentioned earlier. Now, programs also give us that ability to abstract across any execution methodology, agile or waterfall. So we can control any types of projects because all projects should be accountable to cost and also the value that they provide. So it's not okay really just to have a planning methodology that caters to a waterfall approach, much like maybe the project-based methodology I just stepped through, or a planning methodology that is just focused on agile, like Scaled Agile Framework. Really, you need to have a top-down planning approach that can act as that control center for any type of project execution, agile or waterfall in this instance. So next is the capability-driven approach. And this fundamentally introduces one important component, which is the business capabilities themselves. So the introduction of a business capability model. So first and foremost, what is a business capability? Business capabilities really represent the operating fabric of your business. They represent the core functions that your business delivers on. Going back to that insurance example, the function of processing that home insurance claim will be a capability within your capability model. When you think about defining capabilities in an organization, they are what your company runs upon. It's normally 3 to 4 levels deep within a capability model. As soon as you get more granular than that, you're actually into the processes themselves in terms of how that capability will function. When defining your capability model, it's important to break out that operating fabric of your organization, what your organization, how your organization runs. Simply do so disconnected from the IT infrastructure, because then we can start to really map IT assets and technology back to the capabilities, because ultimately capabilities are broken down by processes, people, and technology themselves. So introducing business capabilities is key. So let's take a look at how capabilities that can then be used. So by mapping strategy into capabilities, we can start to generate demand or projects and programs directly from that mapping. For example, if I have a strategy that has no supporting capability, we may make a decision to onboard a new capability into that portfolio, which ultimately is going to result in a project or program to transact that change. If I identify strategic imperatives that have capabilities that are suboptimal or underperforming, we may make an investment decision to invest in those capabilities to improve the performance, again, resulting in the demand. So there is a strong correlation, again, in terms of the projects that have been generated and the strategy itself, because they've been generated from that connection of strategy to capabilities. So even before we think about any semi-sophisticated techniques in terms of when we can do these things, we know we have the right demand from the get-go based on the strategy that's been defined. So that's one of the benefits of this model. The next benefit is one of being able to go beyond just discretionary or strategic investment analysis into understanding the correlation between operational spend and activities with strategy too. So we can, let's say we take this from an IT perspective, we can start to decompose those capabilities down into the IT infrastructure and assets that are responsible for automating those capabilities. And so from an IT perspective, I have the ability to engage the business in terms of how do you want to improve your capability, and then have traceability back down to the applications and infrastructure or IT services in the organization to understand what changes we're going to make. Again, going back to that example that Gartner gave on the home insurance, we can now look at what physical and digital things we can introduce to optimize that capability. So again, it gives you the ability here to break down and understand the correlation of strategic and operational spend and activities against strategy, which is important. So let's take a look at the capability-driven approach in action and see how it really does provide that direct line of sight from strategy all the way through to the resulting execution. So on the top here, we see different strategic imperatives. On the far right, to reduce loss ratio by settling claims more quickly with greater accuracy. From there, we can drill down, let's say, into the level 1 of our capability model. So there, this strategy is going to map to the managed claims overarching capability family. If we were to mine that capability family into the lower level functions, we see the other sub-functions that are going to be key for delivering and executing on this strategic priority. Now, if we stay with that IT example, maybe I can then drill down to see what technology, IT assets, or applications are currently being utilized to automate those two capabilities. And from there, we can understand the sort of full operating fabric, at least of these capabilities, and start to generate projects and programs that are going to transact change needed to knock that strategy out of the park. And so, as mentioned, we're able with the capability-driven approach to see what I consider a sort of 360 view across the whole operating fabric of our organization. It definitely provides an unrivaled way of providing a direct line of sight from strategy all the way through to the resulting execution projects or programs. So looking at techniques to better align execution with strategy, both operational and strategic investments, is one of the key steps in mastering the sort of digital business and elevating the PMO in the organization. So I should have mentioned, but we are going to have a few polls, I think 3 polls in today's session. The first one is going to focus on, obviously, the first trend we looked at. And so the question we're asking is, which best describes your planning model today? So when you think about how you're operating today, are you utilizing the project-based investment approach, the program-driven investment approach, the capability investment approach, or are you today either at the project or program level, but yet aspiring to get to the capability-driven investment approach? So we'll pause for 10 seconds or so to answer those questions. Okay, another 5 seconds. Okay, let's close the polls and take a look at the results. So from here, I can see that, no real surprise, 41% of us are firmly wedged in the project-based investment approach, which is perfectly fine. 27% are transitioning to that program-driven investment approach. 4% today are on the bleeding edge and have already moved to the capability-driven investment approach, but there is 28% of us that is either a project or program, but aspiring to move to capability-driven, which is less than I was expecting, quite honestly. I would say 60% of the calls I take, there is always that aspiration to move or directionally movement to the capability-driven framework, but normally, as shown here, we're firmly rooted within the sort of project-based or program-based approach today. Okay, so let's move back to the slides. I'm going to take a look at trend 2. Trend 2 is focusing on dynamic reallocation. And again, an apt quote here is, life is what's happening while you're busy making other plans. We have to recognize the fact that things always change, no matter what we want, and we have to more effectively react to that. Going back to that 46% metric, where 46% of the potential value from our project and program portfolio is being lost, we can drill down and take a look at why that is occurring to a degree. Some of the problems is around unreliable planning and selecting the wrong projects. Others around sort of being able to take corrective action and gain financial insight and transparency. So when you think about it, one of the reasons why we can lose up to 46% is often from poor financial estimates from the get-go. So having wrong cost and benefit estimates early in the planning process can impact the value we gain from the portfolio. For example, if we're estimating too high in an annual planning process, we're leaving too many projects behind early in the planning process. And unless we have a process to revisit those decisions throughout the year, then that value will remain lost. Conversely, if we're underestimating on these projects, we're bringing too many projects into the execution portfolio, and then need the ability to be able to cull or cut projects throughout the year as we start to run into budget constraints. You know, there was that metric around 18% of projects failing. Obviously, you can't claim value from project failures, so we need the ability to more quickly identify potential failures and maybe react and reallocate funds sooner to maximize value. At the portfolio level, budget is definitely finite, so cost overruns hit us in the back pocket severely as well. So as projects start to show cost creep, something has to give. At the portfolio level, it's going to result in us canceling projects. It's going to result in us de-scoping projects as we stay within those budget constraints, which again is going to impede us from a value perspective. One of the areas that we were surprised to find was impacting from a value attainment perspective was around budget utilization. All too often, organizations not having the ability or not spending all the available funds in a given year. Could be for a variety of reasons. Resource shortfalls, meaning projects weren't kicked off on time. You know, unplanned carryovers, projects slipping from one year to another year and the budget not being utilized. Or just poor forecasting capabilities at large, resulting in Q4 budget utilization problems, giving the PMO no time to react and reallocate funds to drive value within that fiscal period. So now we really need a way of moving from that kind of set it and forget it approach that's often adopted in annual planning into adopting more of a dynamic planning framework. Now, what we found is that there's a new metric that is required from a business point of view in the management of project and program portfolios, one that is key to optimizing spend and maximizing value at any point across the portfolio. And the metric is strategic yield, and it's derived based on strategic value divided by cost. So strategic value is based on understanding the impact that a project will have across the business strategy, so how much it will contribute to one or more business drivers to derive a strategic value score, divided by its cost to give the overall yield of that investment. So let's think about how that yield score can be used. At the project level or program level, it acts as a bang for the buck for different projects based on value over cost. So you can simply stack rank on value over cost, draw a line when you run out of the available budget, and you will have the best bang for the buck using that yield score. It's also an important metric for comparing not just pending projects or proposed projects, but evaluating in-flight projects. It's frustrated me for years that many organizations will use a value-based schema for selecting projects in the annual planning mode, like strategic value, but will then fall back on financial value assessments in evaluating the in-flight projects or portfolio that's being executed. Why not leverage a metric that can be utilized through the life of the project? There's nothing wrong about looking at financial value like NPV, ROI, but you can also look at strategic yield across the life of the project, in planning and in execution. Why? Because it acts as an investment viability indicator. It's a dynamic metric, and we live in a dynamic world. So if cost will fluctuate, which it always does, value should also change, which we're not very good at, but it should change through the life of the project. Therefore, yield will change. So it is an investment viability indicator. If value stays the same and the cost increases for a project, then yield has to fall and acts as that early warning investment viability indicator, or again, CFO metric for our project and program evaluation. It also can be used at the aggregate level. It can be used at the program, at the portfolio level, and can be used to assess planned versus actual yield at the portfolio. So it gives us the ability to say, okay, am I spending all my money? So what's my budget utilization like? But am I spending effectively? Am I getting the, still the appropriate yield from the portfolio? Again, we could spend a whole hour on this metric in itself, but having a new metric to be able to compare both pending and in-flight projects is certainly key. So this dynamic reallocation process, I think many organizations are doing it today, but potentially manually, and it's not automated or become systematic or objective in the organization. At the highest level, it is pretty simple. It assumes that you start with an original portfolio for a certain budget, which often is selected as part of that annual planning process. It also makes the assumptions that things therefore will change throughout the year, and you need the ability on a monthly or quarterly cadence, depending on your choice, to rebalance that portfolio. It understands the frailty in estimating and needs the ability, if projects no longer need all the funds, to be able to release those funds quickly. So there's a concept of starting with the original budget and then having funds released back or given back by the project managers. By the same self-token, some projects will be underestimated. Therefore, they're going to require additional funds, something that we call redirects. So project managers will raise change requests to ask for more money. Now, of course, you're going to accept those releases back without question. If people are going to give you money back, you're going to accept that. But you're now going to trade off the investment in the existing projects with potentially bringing in new projects from the pipeline to do two things. Optimize spend, so make sure that we've maximized our budget utilization, as well as also maximizing the value across the portfolio. And one of the key metrics to be able to do that, comparing when to double down on an existing project, or when to get out of an existing project, or when to bring in a net new project, is strategic yield, because we can stack rank, again, existing versus net new projects and see where the best bang for the buck is. So the process of releasing money, the process of analyzing when to double down on existing projects and fund more, when to bring in new projects, results in a new mix, a rebalanced portfolio at the end of that planning period, which again cannot exceed the original budget that was allocated to that portfolio. So again, a very simple process, one that I find that organizations are doing often today manually and struggling to really reconcile the information to drive these decisions, versus taking an automated process on a monthly or quarterly cadence to really looking at optimizing value across the portfolio. Now, one thing is for certain is that forecasting is a must, or good forecasting is a must when looking to roll out a dynamic planning framework. So it's an exercise in futility to look at dynamic planning until you've addressed building better forecasts in the organization. There's four things that are going to help you build better forecasts. One is training of the PMs themselves. So let's train the project managers, whether they're accidental project managers, whether they're PMI certified project managers, to get better at estimating and forecasting costs. one of our customers said the first time he asked for a forecast across the portfolio, or what the estimates to complete, the PMs just simply took the approved budget, less the actuals, and said, no, that's what I've got left. And he said, no, 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 no. I want you to tell me what you think you're going to spend, not what you think is allocated to your project. So there's certain cultural things that have to be addressed here. From a project manager's point of view, to improve better forecasting, they have to understand the portfolio mindset. So they have to understand that the world is bigger than just their project, and the funds being used for their project, if they don't need them, can be better utilized across the organization by funding additional projects, which will drive value for the organization within that fiscal period. So understanding the sum, i.e. the portfolio, is greater than all the parts, is important. But also there are cultural changes needed at the executive level. What we found is that often project managers don't feel empowered to forecast, because in many organizations it is better to come in grossly under in terms of completed cost to budget than it is to be $1 over. So there's a fear of being hauled up in front of the VP to explain why the project came $1 over, and that leads to holding money hostage on projects, and doesn't sort of feed into the culture of being able to release funds and then want to request money back. So addressing that is key too. And then of course there are different funding models that we can adopt that promote more accurate understanding of estimates and forecasts through the evolution of that project. So if you are considering dynamic planning, don't do that until you start to address some of the more grassroots estimating and forecasting capabilities in your organization. So now let's take a look at the dynamic planning model. So do you, do you have a dynamic planning model in your organization today? And the questions are, we have not adopted a dynamic planning model. We are planning, we have not, but we are planning to adopt a dynamic planning model. We actually do have a dynamic model today, but it's manual and time-consuming for the team to generate the intelligence for the steering committee to take action. We do have a dynamic planning model, and everything's automated and working well. So another 5 seconds and we'll shut the poll. So let's close the poll. So the results should be on your screen in a second. So 45% of us do not have a planning model, 18% don't, but are planning to, which is great. 34% do so, but it's manual endeavors and superhuman efforts today to do it, and 3% have everything automated. So that's good. We have over 50% that either are or planning to in the future, and hopefully we can convince the 46% of you to move to that framework sometime soon too. So let's move on to the next trend, performance measurement. And the quote here, if you can't measure it, you certainly can't manage it. So this is pretty broad, and I'm going to keep it 100,000 foot here. I'm going to take a look at two things here, benefits realization and also the concept of portfolio metrics and benchmarks. Two things that I really think a PMO should be looking to embrace in 2016 and beyond. Mystery to me why benefits realization remains so elusive for many of us today. Again, the concept of that business case only being used to fund a project is all too familiar, and then filed in the desk drawer, never to see the light of day again. So what's holding us back? Why are we not able to establish that important benefits realization framework to really understand whether these investments or projects are delivering on the business objectives that we set up in the first place? So there's a couple of key steps that we see in creating a benefits realization framework. The first and probably most simple is simply to standardize benefit structures within your project and portfolio management system. So as part of a business case, capturing non-financial and financial benefits, standardizing that information is key. By the same self-token, then having the ability then to track at that level beyond the life of the project too is important as well. Now, accountability is a big thing. When a sponsor or whoever is responsible for teeing up the initiative in the first place, they should understand that they're going to be accountable for that benefit. And so they'll put more thought into what that benefit will be versus just a tool used to get a project funded. So accountability is key, and making sure then that you're tracking and holding people accountability is a big factor in encouraging people to get more mature in how they enter benefits. I think the concept of evolving benefit estimates over time is important. Think about how much we know about cost estimates today. They're order of magnitude off early in the planning process, and we have been estimating, tracking, and forecasting costs for years. So the concept of evolving a benefit estimate the same way that we evolve a cost estimate, the deeper and deeper you get into the planning life cycle and execution life cycle of a project is key. So benefits shouldn't be just a swag that's put in play, in the high-level business case. It should be something that we evolve as our understanding of the project, as our understanding of the market improves. One of the problems, certainly within IT, that I've seen around benefits realization is knowing how to track benefits and at what level to track benefits. You think about it, you're funding a project to reduce the cost, the operational cost of an IT asset as an application. Okay, so that's great. It's going to reduce the cost by $500,000. Where do you track that benefit? Does it make sense to track it at the project level after that project's done and dusted? Or is it easier actually to start to look at concepts around asset portfolio management, which we'll take a look at later, and say, okay, well, we funded this project to reduce the ongoing burden of this application by $500,000. I'm therefore going to reduce the costs of this maintenance activities for this application by $500,000. And in years 1, 2, 3 after the project's been completed, if we don't see that saving, it's obvious the project didn't deliver on that benefit. And but yet we have the traceability back to the project based on its impact on the application to understand that's the thing that should have delivered on that. So tracking at the right level is important. Also, making sure that benefits realization isn't just a sort of vague threat, that it's something that you follow through on. Whether you track benefits for all projects is debatable, whether you have a look-back process for certain projects, almost randomly, but start tracking benefits at some point, and then publish the results. Make that visible, because no one wants to be shown as a underperformer in terms of their projects delivering a value, just like they don't want their project to be, have a red light on any other metrics that is tracked through its life. So maybe 2016 and beyond will be the time we really focus on benefits realization. So poll 3 here, who today is tracking actual benefits of their projects and programs? So no, we don't even estimate benefits at this stage. No, we estimate benefits, but we haven't started tracking them. And yeah, we do track benefits. We're all in that regard. So another 5 seconds. And we'll close the poll. No real surprise here. 22% of us are approving projects without any benefit estimates. So obviously, first step in standardizing benefit structures and at least having a business case that goes beyond assessing cost into the resulting benefit is important. A bunch of us obviously are tracking benefits as part of the business case, but haven't yet established that benefits realization framework. So 62% there, and 17% that are all in. Which is great. So back to the slides. So we were looking at performance measurement. We took a very quick look, and I did warn you we were going to stay at 100,000 foot here on each of these at benefits realization. I think the next is starting to identify key portfolio metrics that you can start to track and show the real business impact of your PMO. I think it's true today that PPM tools, which have become this kind of system of record of PPM information, are really acting as a vault of important data. Often, I don't think as a PMO that we're really leveraging that information to our benefit to really show the impact that we're having. Think about that strategic yield metric. It was the combination of value and cost to give you another way of looking at your portfolio. This is not necessarily rocket science. So how do we better access that information? How do we become, like many people in the world today, more data-driven in terms of our activities? How do we leverage that information within that vault to go beyond the traditional KPIs, the project and program level KPIs of cost, resource, or work, risk, whatever they may be, to track other aspects of projects and programs, but certainly start to track how we're better managing the portfolio and what the portfolio is delivering. So the first thing is, how do we look to define the right portfolio metrics? And there isn't a one-size-fits-all rule here. You're really going to look to start to track different metrics at the portfolio level based on the challenges that you perceive in your organization. So you can certainly look, and we have a whole library of metrics that you can consider here. Metrics around strategy, metrics around cost, benefits, governance, obviously schedule, risk, and resource, and other aspects. So what are the right metrics to start to track? Things like strategic yield, things like the ability to more effectively track run, grow, transform mix in your organization, budget utilization. Am I effectively utilizing all the budget? Estimating accuracy through the process. Metrics around velocity through the process, planning velocity, delivery velocity, review velocity. Where are the bottlenecks within our process? CapEx, OpEx ratios, customer satisfaction, and the list really goes on. So the message here really is there's an opportunity to identify key metrics that help you show how the PMO is affecting change within the project and portfolio and the business at large. So establishing the right metrics, and we can certainly help you there in terms of a starting point, and then setting targets and tracking year over year to show improvement. Things like budget utilization is a great example. We had a customer that when they started, the biggest challenge they faced was one of budget utilization. They were spending less than 80% of the available budget. Being able to track year over year how they improve budget utilization in itself was enough of a win to differentiate the PMO from more of a tactical function into a business-orientated, business-aware function. So the last trend is trend 4, asset portfolio management. And I think what we've got to recognize here is that projects and programs are not funded in a vacuum, right? We fund a project and program to make a fundamental change to something within the organization, whether it is to onboard a new product, whether it is to enhance an IT asset like an application, whether it is to optimize or improve a business capability, as I mentioned. So they are funded to make a fundamental change to something in the organization. We have to therefore better understand those enterprise connections to fully visualize the full operating fabric of our business. So there's sort of two parts to this. One is understanding the important synergies between an asset portfolio management framework and a transformational framework that is project and portfolio management. So it doesn't matter here whether you're applying this to product portfolio management, whether you're applying this to capability portfolio management, whether you're applying this to IT asset portfolio management like application modernization or rationalization. The same concepts kind of exist. So with asset portfolio management, the idea of building out an inventory to understand what's included within that portfolio is key, and looking at key characteristics and metrics that are going to help us more effectively make business decisions on these assets. For example, an application portfolio. What are the sort of metrics we want to track for application portfolio management? Things like business fit and value, technology and operational risk, complexity, architectural fit. Other metrics that ultimately are going to help us analyze that portfolio and then make life cycle decisions in terms of what we want to do with that particular asset as it pertains to really digitalizing our business at large. So any decision, in this case for an application, whether to enhance, maintain, retire, will be then teed up and placed in multi-year roadmaps that communicate fundamental changes we're going to make to this asset portfolio. A roadmap on its own, without a discipline to execute on that roadmap, again, is an exercise in futility. So being able to then tie in the synergistic relationship with PPM is important. So transformation executed through PPM, business case, selecting a portfolio, planning portfolio, executing portfolio. But again, that information then updating our asset portfolio so we can continue with the measurement and analysis of that portfolio is key. So, all I'm saying is once you've started to look at mastering more of the business management of projects and programs, the next logical step is to start to bind together the related portfolios, asset portfolios, like capability portfolios, like IT asset portfolios, product portfolios, and others. Kind of related is also this concept of road mapping. We hear a lot about road mapping lately. It seems that most executives we speak to have heard that one of their peers in another organization has a strategic roadmap they're operating to understand the impact on the technology roadmap and so on. It seems to me that any roadmap is a good roadmap at this stage, but it's not as simplistic as that. The purpose of a roadmap really is to look at the time dimension and see how we're evolving our business across portfolios. Again, when I think about enterprise portfolio management at large, it is a discipline of understanding cross-portfolio relationships and being able to both evolve or transform all aspects of our business, strategic decisions or even the operational aspects of our business. So roadmaps in themselves, and there's a variety of different roadmaps obviously here, one of their key functions is the ability to see and quickly visualize cross-portfolio impact and understand the impact of proposed changes across portfolios. In this particular roadmap, it's an application level, entity level roadmap. We're looking at decisions being made on an application, which are being transacted through application development projects. We can see the impact on related applications and the capability or capabilities that those applications are automating. So everything's connected, and we can understand what the sort of reverberating effect across portfolios will be if things change. So we're approaching the hour, so I'm going to start to wrap up here. So some of the key takeaways for today's session is, I do really think that as a PMO, we can position ourselves in more of a strategic capacity. It doesn't mean that you have to become the enterprise PMO. Still, if you're an IT PMO or a departmental PMO, you can still become more strategic in your thinking, even if you're not necessarily positioned in the organization as the new emerging enterprise PMO. So there is an opportunity here for the PMO, by virtue of managing the transformational initiatives, to take a key leadership role in what Gartner calls the digital business or the digitalization of your business. I'll go back to that other question that I posed. I don't think we are managing projects. As a business, we're managing business investments, and of course, there are tactical aspects of delivering those investments, project management, but we also, again, have to go back to what we said before, which is as a PMO, take responsibility for both sides of the equation, mastering execution, as well as becoming more business-minded and becoming the CFO of our project and program portfolios. So, what did we sort of touch on? We touched on the need to really reclaim lost business value, that 46%, by improving our top-down planning techniques, whether that's moving into project-driven or moving from project to program-driven or aspiring to get to a capability-driven approach, which ultimately provides that sort of 360 view across the full operating fabric of our business that makes the digital business or business transformation more of a reality. Now, this concept of just settling for that set it and forget it approach of annual planning is not working anymore. We live in a dynamic world. We need to supplement our planning processes with a dynamic planning process. So this idea of a strategic PMO being able to master all planning cadences is important, of multi-year planning, annual planning, and then the concept of dynamic planning and making corrective action or taking corrective action through the year. Let's focus on being more data-driven. Let's think about what are the ways that we can track metrics that show the true value of a PMO beyond the obvious value of ensuring we have the frameworks in place to execute initiatives well. And again, let's take a look at benefits realization and maybe start by thinking how we can start to track benefits and how that's going to ultimately improve our PPM process. And we talked about asset portfolio management. Having mastered the project and program management domain, or at least the business management of these, let's think about tying in the IT and business asset portfolios. Let's go beyond just the discretionary spend in the organization into visualizing all spend and how it relates to the strategy of our organization. So we're going to wrap up now. First and foremost, as we approach the hour, I want to thank you for attending today, and please look out for future webcasts. I think one of the next ones we may end up doing is one on portfolio metrics and some of the metrics you can look at as a PMO that may help in the case in becoming more business-minded or positioning more of a business value-generating function. But if you want to get started with UMT360 or learn more about how we can empower a more strategic-minded PMO, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Lots of different ways we can get started through educational materials, through envisioning workshops, or even at the right point, get going with the technology that's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting that will ensure your PMO can become more strategic from in a mindset. So with that, we'll pause for any questions and answers that or even the questions that have been posed throughout. So I'm looking at the Q&A wizard now.